The year is 1917, and the location is the bustling industrial outskirts of Sydney, Australia. The world is currently in the throes of the Great War, but a domestic mystery is about to unfold that will shock the nation far more than the distant battles in Europe. On a sweltering afternoon near the Lane Cove River, a gruesome discovery is made that sets a chain of events in motion. A young boy playing in the dense bush stumbles upon a charred heap that looks suspiciously like human remains. The air is thick with the scent of burnt wood and something far more sinister. This discovery marks the beginning of one of the most baffling cases in criminal history, involving a deception so deep it lasted for nearly 2 decades. Police arrive at the scene to find a body consumed by fire to the point where identification seems initially impossible to the naked eye. The initial investigation is sloppy, and the remains are dismissed by local authorities as those of a woman who accidentally burned to death, or perhaps a suicide. The local police force is eager to close the file and move on to more pressing matters in a city teeming with wartime crime and poverty. However, the method of the burning suggests a calculated effort to destroy evidence rather than a tragic accident. The intense heat required to reduce a body to such a state implies the use of an accelerant and a deliberate pile of timber. It is a scene of cold-blooded murder disguised as a mishap. For 3 years, the identity of the burned body remains a mystery buried in the cold case files of the New South Wales Police Department. The case is known simply as the body in the fire, and it haunts the few detectives who suspect foul play was involved. It is not until 1920 that a determined and sharp-witted investigator named Detective Sergeant Robson decides to take a second look at the evidence. Robson is a man who trusts his gut instinct, and he feels that the closure of the original case was premature. He begins to dig through missing person reports from the period of the fire, looking for a woman who vanished without a trace. Robson finds a report concerning a woman named Annie Birkett, who disappeared around the same time the body was found. Annie was a widow with a young son, and she had reportedly left the city with her husband to start a new life. However, her family had not heard from her in years, and their suspicion had grown with every passing month. The husband was a man named Harry Crawford. Harry was a quiet and industrious cleaner at a local hotel who kept to himself. To the outside world, Harry Crawford was an ordinary working-class man, but Robson would soon discover that Harry was the center of a puzzle that defied all logic. To understand the magnitude of the mystery, we must look back at the arrival of Harry Crawford in Sydney years prior. Harry appeared as a rough and tumble young man, looking for work on the docks and in the factories. He was known for his incredible work ethic and his ability to handle heavy labor that would exhaust other men. He spoke with a slight accent and told stories of a life at sea working on merchant ships. No one questioned his background because he fit the mold of the thousands of transient workers drifting through the city. Harry built a life based on hard work and silence, guarding his privacy with a ferocity that kept prying eyes at bay. Harry eventually met Annie Birkett, a widow who owned a confectionery shop and was looking for a stable partner to help raise her son. Annie was charmed by the quiet strength of Harry Crawford, and the two began a courtship that seemed perfectly normal to their neighbors. Harry was attentive and protective, stepping into the role of father figure for her son. They married, and Harry moved into her home, taking on the responsibilities of a husband. For years, they lived as a conventional family unit. Annie had no reason to suspect that the man she shared her bed with was harboring a secret that would eventually lead to her death. The domestic life of the Crawfords appeared stable on the surface, but cracks began to form as the years went on. Harry was intensely jealous and controlling, often preventing Annie from seeing her relatives or going out alone. This behavior was dismissed by neighbors as the actions of a protective husband, but it stemmed from a deep-seated fear of exposure. Harry knew that any close scrutiny could unravel the carefully constructed identity he had maintained for 18 years. The tension in the household grew palpable, especially with Annie's son, who found his stepfather to be distant and oddly secretive about his past. The turning point came when Annie began to notice inconsistencies in Harry's behavior and physical nature. It is believed by historians and investigators that Annie discovered the truth about her husband shortly before her death. The revelation that Harry was not a biological male, but a woman living as a man would have been a shattering betrayal in the conservative society of the early 20th century. Annie likely threatened to expose Harry or leave him, which would have destroyed the life Harry had built. This threat transformed the home into a powder keg waiting for a spark. On the day of the murder, Harry suggested a picnic at the Lane Cove River, a popular spot for families to enjoy nature. He told neighbors they were going to celebrate a special occasion, and Annie dressed in her finest clothes. They took provisions and headed into the bush away from the prying eyes of the city. It was the last time Annie Birkett was ever seen alive. The location was secluded and dense with scrub, offering the perfect cover for a crime. Harry had prepared the site beforehand, gathering wood and ensuring that they would not be disturbed by passers-by. What happened in that clearing was a brutal act of violence followed by a cold calculation. Harry struck Annie down, likely catching her off guard while she was preparing their meal. Once she was dead, he piled brush and timber over her body and set it alight. He tended the fire for hours, ensuring that the flames consumed her features and clothing. It was a gruesome task that required a steely nerve. Harry then packed up the picnic basket and returned to the city alone, telling neighbors that Annie had gone ahead to visit friends and would not be returning for some time. In the days following the murder, Harry spun a web of lies to explain Annie's absence. He told her son that his mother had run off with another man, leaving them both behind. He sold her furniture and her jewelry, acting the part of the grieving and abandoned husband. He eventually moved out of their home and took the boy to live in a different suburb, attempting to distance himself from the scene of the crime. Harry believed he had committed the perfect murder, and for 3 years it seemed he was right. He continued to live and work in Sydney, assuming the heat had died down. Harry Crawford did not remain single for long. He soon met another woman named Lizzie and began a new relationship, eventually marrying her. This second marriage was even more audacious than the first, as Harry was now a murderer living under the constant threat of discovery. He lived with Lizzie in a small house in the suburbs, resuming his life as a working man. He seemed to have erased Annie Birkett from his memory entirely. However, the persistence of Annie's family and the curiosity of Detective Robson were about to catch up with him. Detective Robson tracked Harry down to his new workplace at a hotel in the inner city. When Robson approached him, Harry attempted to remain calm, but his eyes betrayed a deep fear. Robson asked him to come to the station for questioning regarding the disappearance of Annie Birkett. Harry went willingly, hoping to bluff his way through the interrogation, as he had done with every other challenge in his life. He stuck to his story that Annie had left him years ago, and he had no idea where she was. But Robson had gathered witness statements that placed Harry at the picnic site. The interrogation at the police station was intense and grueling. Robson pressed Harry on the details of that day, pointing out the contradictions in his timeline. Harry remained defiant, maintaining his male persona and his innocence. The police decided to hold him in custody while they conducted further investigations. It was during this detention that the truth finally came out. Harry was placed in the female wing of the prison after a medical examination was ordered. The request for a medical exam terrified Harry more than the accusation of murder. The medical examination revealed the shocking truth that Harry Crawford was biologically female. The police were stunned. The man they had been interrogating for murder was a woman who had lived as a man for nearly 2 decades. The revelation spread through the police station like wildfire. The case instantly transformed from a standard murder investigation into a sensational tabloid story. The press dubbed it the man-woman case, and the public was insatiable for details. Harry Crawford was revealed to be Eugene Falleni, born in Italy and raised in New Zealand. Eugene Falleni had run away from home at a young age, finding work on a ship as a cabin boy. It was on the rough seas that Eugene discovered that life was significantly easier and safer as a male. The crew treated the cabin boy as one of their own, and Eugene learned to walk, talk, and fight like a man. This was not merely a disguise, but a survival strategy that became a permanent identity. After years at sea, and a brief period where the secret was discovered due to a pregnancy, Eugene returned to the male persona permanently upon arriving in Australia. The transition to life in Sydney as Harry Crawford was absolute. Eugene bound her chest and wore heavy wool suits even in the summer to conceal her form. She worked in brickyards and pubs, jobs that required physical strength and grit. She drank beer with the men and smoked a pipe, adopting all the mannerisms of the Australian working class. The commitment to the role was total. It was not a performance, but a lived reality. This absolute immersion is what allowed Harry to marry Annie Birkett and live with her for years without raising suspicion. The trial of Eugene Falleni was a spectacle unlike anything Sydney had ever seen. The courtroom was packed with spectators, many of whom were women, fascinated by the defendant who had fooled an entire city. Eugene appeared in the dock wearing a man's suit, refusing to wear female clothing, despite the authorities' attempts to force a dress upon him. The press described him as a strange and tragic figure, a woman who had usurped the privileges of a man. The defense lawyer faced an uphill battle, trying to explain the psychology of the accused to a jury that viewed the deception as a moral depravity. The prosecution focused heavily on the deception, arguing that a person capable of living such a profound lie was capable of anything, including murder. They painted Harry as a manipulative predator who had tricked Annie into marriage for her money, and then killed her when the game was up. The evidence of the fire and the charred remains was presented in gruesome detail. The jury was told that the fire was a deliberate attempt to hide the gender of the victim, although it was actually to hide the identity. The prosecutor hammered home the betrayal of Annie Birkett. Eugene watched the proceedings with a stoic expression, rarely showing emotion. However, there were moments when the weight of the exposure seemed to crush him. He was no longer Harry Crawford, the respected worker and husband. He was exposed to the world as a curiosity, a freak in the eyes of the public. The trial focused as much on his gender as it did on the murder. The defense tried to argue that the death was accidental during an argument and that the burning was a panicked reaction, but the jury was not swayed. The testimony of Annie's son was particularly damaging. He described a stepfather who was distant and strange, and recounted the day his mother disappeared. He told the court how Harry had lied to him about his mother leaving. The boy had grown up believing his mother had abandoned him, only to find out she had been murdered by the person supposed to protect them. The emotional impact of this testimony sealed Eugene's fate in the eyes of the jurors. They saw a cold calculator who had destroyed a family to protect a secret. The jury took only 2 hours to reach a verdict. Eugene Falleni was found guilty of the murder of Annie Birkett. The judge sentenced him to death, a sentence that was later commuted to life imprisonment. The public reaction was mixed, with some calling for the gallows, and others feeling a strange pity for the woman who had lived such a hard and lonely life. Eugene was transferred to the Long Bay Reformatory for women, a place that must have felt like a foreign planet after decades of living as a man. Prison life was a torment for Eugene. He was forced to wear a dress and was addressed as a woman by the guards and other inmates. He struggled to adapt to the social dynamics of the women's prison, often isolating himself from the others. He continued to refer to himself as Harry whenever possible and maintained his masculine mannerisms. The tragic irony was that in prison Eugene was more of an outcast than he had ever been in the outside world. He served 11 years of his sentence before being released on compassionate grounds due to failing health. Upon release, Eugene Falleni attempted to live a quiet life under the name Mrs. Jean Ford. It was a final transformation, but a hollow one. The vibrancy and strength of Harry Crawford were gone, replaced by a frail and broken woman. He lived in a boarding house in Paddington, earning a meager living as a landlady. The notoriety of the case had faded, but the scars remained. Eugene lived in fear of being recognized by the press or the public who had once consumed every detail of the trial. The psychological toll of living two distinct lives is hard to fathom. For 18 years in Sydney, Eugene had successfully navigated a male-dominated world, enjoying the freedoms and respect that came with it. To have that stripped away and to be branded a murderer and a deviant was a heavy burden. Modern psychologists would likely analyze Eugene's life through the lens of gender identity, but in the 1930s, he was simply seen as a deceiver. His story remains a complex tapestry of survival, identity, and tragedy. The end came tragically and abruptly for Eugene. In 1938, just years after his release, he was struck by a motor vehicle while stepping off a curb in Oxford Street. He died from his injuries shortly after. The death was ruled accidental, but it served as a final sad footnote to a tumultuous life. The person who had survived the rough seas, the brutal brickyards, and the harsh prison system was taken by a mundane traffic accident. He was buried in a pauper's grave, his legacy largely forgotten for decades. In recent years, the story of the woman who lived as a man has been revisited by historians and writers. The focus has shifted from the sensationalism of the crime to the extraordinary nature of the deception. How did he manage to fool everyone for so long? How did he navigate the intimacies of marriage without being discovered? These questions continue to intrigue us. The 18-year period of his life as Harry Crawford in Sydney stands as a testament to the power of human will and the fluidity of identity. The case also sheds light on the social conditions of the time. It reveals how easy it was to disappear and reinvent oneself in a world before digital records and surveillance. It highlights the strict gender roles of the era and the extreme measures some would take to escape them. Eugene Falleni chose a life of danger and secrecy over the limitations placed on women. It was a choice that granted him freedom for a time, but ultimately exacted the highest price imaginable. Today, the location of the murder near the Lane Cove River is a quiet suburban park. There is no monument to Annie Birkett and no marker for the crime that took place there. The bush has reclaimed the site, burying the secrets of the past under layers of earth and vegetation. Yet the story persists in the archives of the true crime community. It is a reminder that the most shocking mysteries are often found not in fiction, but in the dusty files of history. The legacy of the man-woman case challenges our perceptions of truth and identity. Was Harry Crawford a villain, a victim, or something in between? The murder of Annie Birkett was a heinous act that cannot be excused. However, the life that led to that moment was one of profound complexity. As we look back on this century-old case, we are left with a haunting portrait of a person who would rather kill and burn than face the truth of who they were born to be. As we close the docket on this case, we are left to ponder the many other secrets that history has swallowed whole. How many others lived like Harry Crawford, but took their secret to the grave? The story of the woman who lived as a man for 18 years is a rare glimpse into a hidden world. It is a story of a desperate masquerade that ended in fire and ash, leaving behind a mystery that still captivates us today.